Katie, Willie, good to see you again.
Likewise.
Much as we'd like to be talking about speed skating or curling or hockey, big week in Washington. Over the weekend, big change over here in D.C. at the Canadian Embassy.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. Kirsten Hillman, the longtime ambassador here, is moving home, and Mark Wiseman is coming in.
And, what a time to be moving in to be taking on this role when you've got so much at stake and Canada is really relying on some stability in this moment, trying to sort of ensure that the trading relationship can deepen and grow, and how to navigate a president that is unpredictable.
Challenging and probably oddly terrifying was probably an overstatement, but for...
I'm sorry, was that terrifying or terrifying?
Terrifying, good one. Serving as Canada's ambassador to the U.S., as we all know, is important and difficult and complicated at the best of times. These are not the best of times. I think it's fair to say these are the relationship between the two countries is probably at its most strained point in modern times.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a time when it has been worse, if that's the right word. So today we're asking, what does it take for Canada's ambassador to be heard in Washington? And can the new ambassador change the channel? I'm Paul Hunter.
I'm Katie Simpson.
And I'm Willie Lowry, here, 2 blocks from the White House, which by now I hope you know is, of course, the name of the podcast. Don't forget to tell your friends and follow us on your favorite podcast app and watch us on YouTube. But also, fun fact, pertaining to this week's episode, we are 1.5 kilometers from the Canadian Embassy.
Okay, the first thing we need to make clear is just how much of an uphill battle Canada's ambassadors historically generally face. Because guess what? Americans think a lot less about Canada than Canadians think about America. I often think it's almost a pastime in Canada to talk about anecdotes in the United States where people don't know anything. I had a server at a restaurant in Miami once congratulate me on the quality of my English. Way to go. And I thought, well, but on the other hand, $1.3 trillion in trade annually. It's a big deal, but it can be hard to be heard in this city.
Yeah, especially when it comes to this moment in the White House. Donald Trump might, bring up Canada, fairly regularly on social media, or sometimes he'll take shots at Canada. But generally speaking, when it comes to the urgent issues that the White House is dealing with, Canada is not at the top of the list in the same way that Canada is dealing with, this urgent crisis that is the Canada-U.S. relationship. The White House does pay attention, particularly the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa is paying attention to the climate, the conversations that are happening in Canada and those kinds of things. But when it comes to, Canada might see something very, very urgent, it's not necessarily reciprocated by the Americans. And I think for a Canadian audience to sort of hear that and understand that, it helps put into context why sometimes it's harder to get some doors opened and get those conversations happening when it comes to things that might be an urgent burning issue in Canada and not so much down here.
Yeah, we are part of the equation, but by no means the sum of it.
I heard from a former U.S. ambassador to Canada, likening the Canadian ambassador's job here as more significant and higher up the ladder than the foreign minister, for example. So it's a big deal for that person to be that person, and for the president to know that person is the voice of Canada in this country. Willie, you're a former ambassador, are you not? That's what you keep telling everyone. What does the job of ambassador, I know this sounds like we're dumbing it down a little bit, but what does the job of ambassador actually entail?
Yeah, former ambassador of maple syrup. No, but listen, as you just said, it's a very important job. Of course, for many people, it will be their career highlights. They are the face of the Canadian government. They're also interlocutors, and their job is essentially not just to be the face of Canada here, but to reach out and shore up business deals and relationships, both, in the House and Congress, but also in states. They crisscross the country. So it's a multifaceted job, and certainly one that is probably harder today than it was yesterday, so to speak.
A lot of pressing of the flesh, as they say, right? And I think especially now, with the current administration, the flesh you want to press, if I can put it that way, the shaking of hands, the meetings, it's going to be up on Capitol Hill, right? Where I think it's fair to say, it's been a complicated time in this country, right? Like nobody wants to cross Donald Trump, which is why it was kind of a stunner this month when not only Democrats, but 6 Republican representatives voted to support a bill to roll back tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. I mean, look, there's a long way to go before that would, happen in the real world, but 6 Republicans voted against the wishes of Donald Trump. I think that's no small deal, right? Yeah. And Mark Wiseman is going to know that he very well may get a much more receptive audience than you might expect on Capitol Hill, where people can say, hey, we're going to sort through this. We're going to move forward.
And I think there are 2 key things that Canadians should think about in this moment, is that the levers of power in this an election year, a midterm election year, they could change. And so the Canadian government may be positioning itself differently because what if Republicans lose control of the House or possibly even lose control of the Senate, much less likely than the House, but what if there is a shift in power? And so it's going to be about managing those relationships, and the other relationships that I think, aside from Capitol Hill, that are going to be so crucial, and I know based on our reporting that are so crucial, is with business leaders, because Ambassador Hillman had regularly been in contact with business leaders because they are sort of the pipeline to the inside of the Trump administration. And how and when do things change in America? It's when we do see some of that pushback from business leaders who are concerned that they're not going to be able to continue to make money, build jobs, and all of those kinds of things. And when there has been sort of pushback on the Trump administration, we have seen sort of some movement or perhaps a step back. Oftentimes, it's the voice of business leaders who are the ones making that sort of headway.
And I would argue another important aspect of the job is kind of the intelligence gathering, right? This person's supposed to be taking the temperature and helping the Prime Minister interpret how the kind of actions that are taking place in Ottawa are impacting and resonating in Washington. So, and vice versa.
The problem is Trump, right? And the landscape that Wiseman's coming into. Look at the Gordie Howe Bridge as an example, right? You've got the Maroon family in Detroit that owns the Ambassador Bridge. They see the money that they make off that shrinking. So they get on the phone and they get Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, on the phone, say this is bad. Lutnick hangs up with them, picks up the phone again, calls Donald Trump. Next thing you know, Trump is putting out a post saying, hey, maybe we can kibosh the whole thing. That is the problem for Mark Wiseman. That is the world into which he's stepping into. That's the way things work here, and it's very, very different than past administrations and very, very complicated.
Yeah, and that is everything that I understand based on our reporting is that this was a factor during the first Trump administration, but now in the second Trump administration, it's on steroids. That, there were people behind the scenes that were sort of helping Canada when it came to some crucial issue or some crucial, challenges and ongoing negotiations. When NAFTA was being renegotiated during Trump's first term, there would be times when, the Canadian officials who were leading those negotiations, they would get a phone call from someone of the likes of Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who's deeply involved in these negotiations, saying, Trump's in a really good mood right now. Now might be the time to make a phone call or the space for a text message to sort of move things along. There were people who saw the value, whether it was in the Canada-U.S. relationship or the value of the trade agreement or whatever it was. And there were some of those allies behind the scenes that could sort of have some influence with Trump himself. It seems now all of those sort of, we can call it supports or additional help that might have helped Canada advocate its case, that does not exist, I have been told, anymore, and that it comes down to Trump and whatever decision he's going to make.
And furthermore, that decision could change the next day and then change again the day after that. Katie, you and I have come to know the former ambassador quite well over the course of time, the now former ambassador. What do we know about Kirsten Hillman? What should people know about the job that she did and the kind of person that she was in that gig?
So oftentimes, this is viewed as like the most important diplomatic posting any sort of person can get. And Kirsten Hillman's sort of rise is very different than the traditional trajectory. Oftentimes we see a political ally moved into that role, someone the prime minister trusts and can be like a confidant and also help them on other issues other than managing the Canada-U.S. relationship. Kirsten Hillman really rose to prominence. It was actually in the government of Stephen Harper. She was a key negotiator with that trade deal, the CPTPP.
She was huge.
Huge role. She was actually back in Ottawa, is my understanding, for the unveiling of Stephen Harper's portrait. And she really has a lot of across party lines in Canada respect, because she's not a hyper sort of raging partisan like you can see in these kinds of roles, which would not necessarily be unusual. But she rose to prominence helping negotiate that trade agreement. And then she was involved in the NAFTA talks. She's a negotiator, a trade negotiator by trade, and was so vital in that role. And she worked very, very closely with the previous ambassador, David McNaughton, who was more traditional on the partisan sort of positioning and moving into that kind of role. He was a trusted, he advised Trudeau through a lot of things, whether they were Canada-U.S. relations or even with domestic politics as well. And when David McNaughton decided he was going to take a step back, she moved into that role. She's the first woman to ever take on that role. I was doing a profile of Kirsten Hillman when she was moving into the role, and there's this one wall in the Canadian Embassy, and it's pictures of all the people who have previously been the ambassador. And one thing that sort of stood out is that it was all men. It was all dudes. And Hillman was the first woman to step into this role, to be given this role. And so it was another sort of symbolic moment of change. The Trudeau government saw a deep value in her ability to continue to do this job because she was so deeply connected with the Trump world. The Biden years there were some challenges, of course, but obviously it was less of a challenge in terms of it was more of a traditional Canada-U.S. relationship. You have irritants that pop up, but it's not sort of an existential crisis like we're dealing with now. And she, she's got the key people on in her contacts and like can text them and say, hey, but I do know that the challenges in sort of getting access and getting sort of a firm answer out of people from the Trump administration in this go around is much harder than the previous go around.
And I wonder too if she wasn't somehow tainted by the fact that she was so closely connected with Trudeau, right? That I can only imagine in Donald Trump's mind was perhaps a knock, or not necessarily a knock, but just, made it, I guess a knock.
Lower on the Trump scale, higher on the Katy Perry scale.
Exactly. Well said.
The words I wrote down some words that I've known her for some time. Widely respected, thoughtful, open to the media, which was, I think, helpful for us in our jobs, aware of the landmines in front of her, and a proud and forceful Canadian. And I think that was to be heralded. She was no stranger to U.S. television.
Yep.
She was on CNN not long ago talking with Jake Tapper after Trump posted a picture on social media, that famous picture with the map showing the American flag all over Canadian turf and Greenland.
Address this part of it. Canada lives because of the United States.
Canada lives because of the strength of Canadians, because of the ingenuity and hard work of Canadians. And right now that's what we're focused on. We're focused on doing for ourselves what we can in this time of volatility, in this time of change. But we're also keen to continue to have a very productive relationship with the United States. We're your biggest customer.
Big part of her job, big part of any ambassador's job, sell the country to America and Americans. Willie?
Yeah, I think she's done an admirable job. Obviously, the last year has been incredibly difficult for her mandate here in the U.S., just with where relations are. But, if you look at that vote in the House last week with Republicans, essentially, I believe 6 Republicans getting on board and voting to symbolically at least overturn Trump's tariff policy towards Canada, that's a win. And I think it shows you that Canada does have friends here in the U.S.
Is being heard.
I also think that part of the reason we saw her appearing on American cable news networks so frequently is one thing, she's trying to sell the country to the people who are watching, but in the off chance that something, hits the feed or Donald Trump or Trump administration officials happen to be watching, oftentimes it was left to Hillman to make these appearances and sort of have to sort of correct the record on some of the claims Donald Trump would make when it comes to, different irritants in the Canada-U.S. relationship. And so much of what I've heard about managing that relationship based on our reporting has to do with finding a way to make the point without sort of overtly correcting the president or suggesting that he may have been given information that is not accurate, and still also navigating a way to find that path to sort of make the case as to why it's in America's interest to continue this relationship, largely the trading relationship, with Canada, and how it's to your benefit and how you win by continuing on with this.
And you hear from multiple people, and I've heard from multiple people directly that last part is key, right? And we've said this before, I think, on this podcast, that Trump has to be seen to win, right? And not only that, as somebody was pointing to me the other day, the other side has to be seen to lose, right? And that's how you get anywhere with Trump, is to make him be able to say that this was a win and that this was a loss for the other side. And that is what Mark Wiseman is coming into. What do we know, Willie, about Mark Wiseman?
Yeah, he's a finance guy and a close friend of Mark Carney, but I think that financial acumen is probably the reason why he got this job. I think people think that he'll be able to kind of speak the language that this administration speaks, hopefully be able to get the ear of Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary.
Jameson Greer.
Jameson Greer, of course. His background, he worked at the Canada Pension Plan for a long time, rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the chief executive there. He also worked at BlackRock for several years. That's the largest asset management group in the world. He was ousted from BlackRock for failing to disclose a consensual relationship. He's also, and this is outside of the finance world, a co-founder of the Century Initiative, a somewhat controversial organization whose goal is, or one of their goals is to increase the population of Canada to 100 million by 2100.
And the thing is, that is quite controversial in Quebec, along with some of his previous statements about supply management. That has drawn some criticism from politicians in Quebec, fearing that he won't defend supply management, which of course has to do with Canadian dairy production and sort of protections for the dairy industry and farmers. And he had made comments in the past about continuing on that path, questioning whether that's the wise thing to do. It has led to some criticism, particularly from Quebec, but the Carney government has said that, they're not going to get rid of supply management, even though Donald Trump constantly complains about Canadian dairy protections.
It's incredible, the list of things on his to fret about agenda: supply management, dairy, digital services, defense spending, Canada's relationship with China. Like, it's a lot.
He's widely viewed as a money guy and a deal maker guy. And I was told, according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the situation, that remember when Mark Carney came down for that FIFA World Cup event, and it was him and Claudia Sheinbaum, and they were on the big stage, and Trump won the FIFA World Peace Prize. I was told that Prime Minister Carney's goal in that meeting was to have a private moment with Trump, and we saw them chit-chatting in the balcony, to say, hey, my guy, my deal maker is coming on in here, and he's looking, let's get a deal done. You're going to love him. He's a deal guy. He's a money guy. And that was like sort of the key message that Mark Carney was going to try to deliver to Donald Trump. I could never get it out of anyone whether that actually happened, but that had sort of been the stated goal, to sort of hype him up as like, he's the kind of guy that's going to speak your language or the language of the people in your world. And they view him as that. He's also taken a different route. We talk about Kirsten Hillman took a different route into this role. So is Mark Wiseman. He's come in from the outside. He doesn't have the bureaucratic experience. He's not a trade lawyer like Kirsten Hillman was. But I think the federal government is trying to remedy that. They put in Janice Charette, who's going to be the key trade negotiator. Her key counterpart is going to be the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer. So all of the technical stuff is going to sort of be handled by them, which I understand that the Canada-U.S. talks, they're trying to have talks to organize talks. It's not in a good spot.
But the beauty of Janice Charette is that she gets that.
Yeah.
Right? And that means the ambassador can worry about other stuff, right? And can go to Capitol Hill and can work the business crowd. The CUSMA talks, USMCA, as they call it down here, that's her thing.
Yeah.
And I'll just, the things that I've heard about Wiseman, smart, quick study, keen to do the job, and inquisitive. He's been reaching out to a lot of people who've been in the job, who've been in the zone of the job, to find out what the lay of the land is, and that's, I think, a good thing.
And that lack of traditional kind of credentials, that's not a knock with this administration.
No,
right?
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
As we record this podcast, relatively speaking, somewhere around right now, Mark Wiseman is presenting his credentials, letters of credence. And I don't know, it's a kind of an anachronistic thing, right? You walk into the Oval Office, it's very ceremonial, and you're actually handing a letter from, not from Mark Carney, but from the Governor General to say, hey, this is our ambassador, and you shake hands and pictures are taken, very formal. And it's like, part of me wonder, like, does this stuff still go on? Like, I guess it does.
It
because
does.
it is going on right now, you know?
It's closed door today. I wish they were going to open it up to the public so we could all see, because it's not just Canada that goes in.
It's a
multiple
bunch of them,
countries.
right? Exactly, yeah. And now, of course, the ambassador is just one of many Canadians working down in Washington to try to affect policy here. We got a great question about this thing exactly from a listener named John Bailey. He writes, quote, I understand the Canadian Embassy is close to both the White House and Congress, but what about the provincial governments? Who coordinates their presence in D.C.? Do they act in unison or in their own provincial self-interest? And he says, isn't that like herding cats? Which I think is true. And there's a lot of offices down here, right? I mean,
Alberta, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba.
BC has, I think, offices on the left coast, as they say. How does that work? Who wants to handle that?
So essentially, each province does have priorities, and so some of these provincial reps are based up at the Canadian Embassy. So the Ontario rep really deals a lot with the auto sector. Manitoba's rep, who is Richard Madden, who's a former CBC journalist.
Our friend
Richard. Richard has been dealing with Arctic security, agriculture, and critical minerals for Manitoba. When it comes to Alberta, it's energy. And can I say energy one more time? And energy for Quebec as well is a key thing there too. And so sometimes they need to ensure that they're on the same page in terms of like reading from the same sort of songbook. And generally they work with the Canadian ambassador. They're not trying to get in the way. They're trying to ensure that the trading relationship continues, but also perhaps look for opportunities to deepen it to ensure that, you know, the economies in Canada that rely on these kinds of things can continue to rely on them in this weird
every
moment.
now and then you get a bomb
Yep.
in the form of an
no
ad.
idea what you're talking
No
about.
idea what you're talking, in the form of an ad from the Ontario government.
Throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Lead balloon, that went over as.
So right there is the reason that the two governments are not talking right now.
That ad caused a disruption in the ongoing Canada-U.S. negotiations to reach some sort of relief on tariffs that had been going on. They'd been slowed down quite significantly at that point, but that was sort of the final nail in the coffin to break them off. And now it's my understanding that the hope, where the talks are in this moment is that Canadians and Americans are trying to agree as to when they can sit down to have conversations about these kinds of things.
And I would just add, back to John's question here, it shows you that it's not just these provincial representatives that you kind of have to coordinate, but sometimes provincial premiers as well.
It's interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day who would know, and I said, so what's your advice to Wiseman? And in this echoes something we were talking about, I think, last week or the week before, and it was 2 words: don't panic, right? There will be people who will want to listen to you on Capitol Hill again, who have influence, business leaders as well, to your earlier point, Katie, but don't panic, right? Like we're a big deal. We began this by talking about, is it hard to get heard in Washington? But $1.3 trillion in trade annually between the two countries is a big deal.
It is. And if you look at the send-off that Hillman got from lawmakers, very well respected,
Indeed.
Wiseman is coming in. We have clout. The Canadian government in lots of places.
At the same time, we are not a priority.
This is true.
That's the thing.
John, thanks for the question. That got us going again. We love getting your questions, and we do read every single one. So please send us a note, or even better, a voice memo, because then we can play it. That would be nice, yes. Send it to WashingtonPod, all one word, at CBC.ca. That's WashingtonPod at CBC.ca.
If you're watching or if you're listening to us on Spotify, you can also leave a comment there.
All right, next Tuesday, we'll all be busy with Trump's State of the Union address, the first of his second term. Our episode might be a little bit slower getting to you next Wednesday because we want to bring you fresh analysis of the speech after it wraps late Tuesday night. It'll be a long night for everyone here. And so with that, time to say goodbye. Katie, Willie, thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.